What if one of the darkest drill stories in Philadelphia was never really about one rapper at all? What if the name everybody recognized was only the front door to something much bigger? Something that stretched across West Philadelphia, Southwest Philadelphia, Parkside, South Philly, North Philly, and deep into a timeline of shootings that prosecutors say left 5 people dead and 35 total victims in less than 2 years. Because that is what makes the story of the young bag chasers, campus clappers, and the Parkside killers so different from the usual rapper story. Before we get into this story, I did a deeper exclusive version on my site where I break down the Reddit posts, extra details, exact locations, and the parts of this case that go way deeper than what I can fit into this YouTube video. The link is in the description. This is not just the rise and fall of YBC Duel. This is not just another drill documentary about one disrespectful rapper who made too many enemies. This is a story about how a neighborhood rap movement, a string of killings, and a citywide retaliation cycle allegedly fused into something far more dangerous. And by the time Philadelphia authorities finally laid the whole thing out in public in February of 2026, they were no longer describing isolated bodies, random shootings, or disconnected beefs. They were describing a machine, a years-long war built on grief, revenge, internet clout, and music that prosecutors say became evidence in the very case used to bring the whole thing down. The public first learned just how big the case had become when the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office announced that 19 people were being charged in connection with YBC, CCK, and PSK. Authorities said the shooting spree ran from September 21st, 2022 through May 18, 2024. They said it involved multiple neighborhood groups, repeated blocks, and nearly 24 incidents. They also said the case was built with ballistics, surveillance video, witness statements, and digital evidence, the kind of detail that turns a street war into a prosecutable timeline. And once you start tracing that timeline, one thing becomes clear almost immediately. This story did not begin with the indictment. It did not even begin with YBC Duel becoming infamous online. The roots go back to a time when the young bag chasers were still just a group of West Philadelphia kids with a camera, a microphone, and the same dream every neighborhood rap crew starts with. According to reporting from the Philadelphia Inquirer, YBC began around 2017 among friends in the bottom, around Belmont, Mantua, and West Powelton. They had known each other since childhood. They played sports together. They went to school together. And in those early days, the music was not just entertainment. It was the exit plan. That detail matters more than people think, because every violent street story gets flattened once it reaches the internet. The names become symbols. The did become scoreboards. The songs become evidence of disrespect.
Now at 5 tonight, a chaotic scene caught on camera. Today, detectives released new video of the moment 4 people opened fire on a group of teenagers in West Philadelphia. 2 16-year-olds and a 13-year-old are still hospitalized.
But before all of that, there are usually kids who still believe they are on the edge of turning it into something else. For YBC, one of the early names that embodied that possibility was Tajay Brooks, known as J100. Brooks was described in reporting as one of the most naturally gifted early YBC rappers, one of the original faces of what the group could have become if the music had stayed ahead of the violence. But in Philadelphia, especially in scenes where rap and neighborhood identity are tightly tied together, the distance between potential and tragedy can disappear fast. And for YBC, the collapse into something darker had already begun before Brooks himself was killed. One of the emotional turning points, according to the Inquirer, was the 2019 killing of Joshua Munson. After his death, people close to the scene said the mood changed, the music got darker, the crew got more paranoid, rivals began dissing the dead more openly online. Even a truce attempt reportedly encouraged by Meek Mill failed to hold. Once that happened, the line between rap identity and retaliation started to dissolve. The music no longer sounded like kids chasing a break. It started sounding like young men documenting a war they felt they were already trapped inside. As the group hardened, it also expanded. Public reporting says YBC built ties with younger and allied figures, including members of YFA or Young Face Arrangers. Those alliances mattered because they increased reach, manpower, and the number of names pulled into the orbit of the feud. At the same time, the public face of YBC was becoming clearer. Abdul Vix, known to almost everybody as YBC Dog, emerged as the most visible symbol of the crew. He was not the whole organization, but he was the face most outsiders saw. He was the one whose personality, trolling, and music made YBC impossible to ignore. And the more that visibility grew, the uglier the story became. And this is where the story gets even deeper, because once you start laying out the full timeline, the repeated locations, the extra people tied into this case, and the Reddit posts around it, the whole picture gets way bigger than the public version. I did that deeper exclusive breakdown on December of 2020. So if you want that version, the link is in the description. LLC, giving the brand a business shell. Reporting later described how YBC was making real money from streaming, online presence, and other hustles tied to the group's identity. That detail sits at the heart of the entire case, because prosecutors and reporters alike would later describe a world where music, reputation, and violence were no longer separate lanes. The more notorious the names became, the more attention the music got. The more attention the music got, the more value there was in escalating the mythology. And in that kind of environment, every insult, every death, and every retaliation could be repackaged as content. Then there was the other side. Campus Clappers, or CCK, was not just a single corner or a single clique. Reporting describes CCK as an alliance formed in late 2021 from multiple neighborhood groups, including the Campus, the Clappers, and the Clappers. That matters because it turns the story from a simple one block versus one block narrative into something much wider. Different neighborhoods, different corridors, different rivalries feeding into the same overall war. CCK gave the feud structure on the other side, just as YBC and its affiliates had structure on theirs. Then there was PSK, the Parkside Killers. That name carries old Philadelphia history. Long before this current indictment, PSK was already part of local culture, immortalized decades ago in Schoolie D's famous track, asking what PSK meant. But the modern PSK connection in the 2026 case is not about nostalgia. It is about present-day Parkside identities, present-day defendants, and present-day shootings. The old roots give the name cultural weight. The new charges give it present-day fear. Once the structure of the rivalry was in place, the killings began stacking up in a way that would later make the grand jury case feel almost inevitable. On December 5th, 2022, Tajay Brooks was shot on the 4300 block of Parish Street. Police responded at 9:20 that night and found him suffering from multiple gunshot wounds. He was pronounced dead after being taken to Penn Presbyterian Medical Center. Years later, the public homicide page for Brooks's case was updated to say it had been solved, and the police site noted that 3 individuals had been arrested on March 12, 2026, with case outcomes pending trial. Public reporting and the broader indictment ties CCK aligned defendants to the killing. That death carries enormous weight in this story because Brooks was not just another casualty. He represented the earlier version of YBC, the version that still looked like a rat breakout story. His murder became one of the clearest symbols of how completely the scene had transformed. Then on May 16, 2023, another killing hit the board. Kamir Scott was shot on the 600 block of North Preston Street. Police responded around 9:50 that night, found him with multiple gunshot wounds, and later listed the case as solved. Public reporting tied a PSK defendant to Scott's death, which made his killing another important hinge point in the war. At that point, the body count was no longer confined to one side or one lane. It was widening, and the names attached to different factions were starting to pile up. But if there is one location that seems to sit at the center of the map more than any other, it is Jefferson Street. That corridor comes up over and over again in the public incident timeline. Late May of 2023 brought multiple shootings around the 5200 block of Jefferson. Then on July 8, 2023, Sharif King was killed on that same stretch. According to police records, officers responded at 2:04 in the afternoon. Reporting later described how men in a stolen Acura allegedly waited near a corner store for someone they believed matched the description of a rival before opening fire. In other words, this was not random drift violence. It was targeted, patient, and deliberate. Jefferson Street matters because it tells you how the war functioned. The same blocks keep reappearing. The same corridors keep lighting up. It is one thing to say several crews were shooting at each other across Philadelphia. It is another thing entirely to show that the conflict kept circling back to the same places, as if the violence had its own geography. Once you see that, the story changes. It stops looking like noise and starts looking like a system. The public timeline in the indictment also included non-fatal shootings that make the same point. Authorities tied defendants to incidents on North 75th Street, North 13th Street, Wallace Street, Aspen Street, Reno Street, North Brooklyn Street, North 53rd Street, South 56th Street, West Girard, R Street, and Lancaster Avenue. Some of those shootings injured bystanders. One of the victims identified in the public reporting on the September 2022 shooting on North 13th Street was an 8-year-old child grazed in the head. That detail alone tells you how wide the fallout really was. This was not just enemies finding enemies. This was neighborhoods being swallowed by the logic of a feud. Then came one of the most haunting chapters in the entire case. On December 7th, 2023, Sierra Stafford was killed after leaving work near 29th and Clearfield. Reporting placed the shooting just after 8:15 at night near a McDonald's. What made his death especially disturbing was that public reporting said he was not directly in the feud the way other names in the case were. Instead, prosecutors and reporters said he was allegedly targeted because of his brother's ties. That changes the emotional meaning of the entire story. Once a war starts reaching for brothers, workers, and loosely connected names, it is no longer just a feud between participants. It is a system of vengeance that begins to spread into anybody standing within range. And the aftermath of Stafford's killing is what made this case especially notorious. According to the Inquirer, YBC members marked Stafford's death through music, social media, and imagery tied to McDonald's. Prosecutors later pointed to that kind of conduct as part of the larger pattern in which killings did not simply end at the crime scene. They were allegedly transformed into online taunts, songs, and branding. That is one of the most disturbing features of this entire case.
You from the time that you're born, right? You have something like 5th Street and 7th Street where you're involved in this because your dad was involved in it, your grandpa was involved in it. There has been a way to monetize that. Every song is about specific individuals, right? There is a reason why YBC Jewel was called Mr. Disrespectful. He would literally dig up graves of people, or at least purported to, would videotape himself doing that, and then would put it up on social media. It's not just that it's on YouTube. It's on Apple Music. It's on Spotify. That is how they make their money.
The city was not just dealing with shootings. It was dealing with a culture in which the dead could be turned into recurring punchlines for streams, clout, and psychological warfare. That detail also helps explain why authorities kept emphasizing digital evidence. This was not a case built on one witness and one confession. Prosecutors said they used surveillance, ballistics, witness statements, and digital material. And in reporting tied to individual cases, that digital material became even more specific. In the Sharif King case, prosecutors referenced cell site data, surveillance, clothing, and even an Instagram voice memo allegedly discussing the shooting. That is the kind of evidence trail that shows how the internet can become part of the prosecutorial file in a drill war. The music and social media presence did not just tell the story afterward. According to authorities, it helped them build the case. Then, on May 18, 2024, another major killing pushed the case forward. Kadir Cheeks was found shot outside a restaurant on the 5400 block of Baltimore Avenue at 10:48 that night. The public homicide page for Cheeks' case now states it is solved and says a suspect was arrested on February 25th, 2026. Reporting tied multiple YBC and YFA connected defendants to the homicide, and prosecutors allege that a woman helped lure him outside. Whether viewers realize it or not, this killing becomes one of the central bridge points in the story. It connects the running retaliation cycle to conspiracy allegations, to alliances across different groups, and to the broader pressure building in the neighborhood surrounding the feud. By this stage, the map was no longer subtle. Parish Street, Preston Street, Jefferson Street, 29th and Clearfield, Baltimore Avenue, North 13th, North Brooklyn, 53rd Street. The feud was not sitting still. It was moving through the city, but it also kept returning to the same pressure points. Like certain blocks had become magnets for the war. And through all of this, Abdul Vix kept becoming more visible. YBC Duel was the name outsiders knew. He was the one whose music and attitude made him infamous far beyond West Philadelphia. The Inquirer later reported that even Vic seemed to understand what was coming, quoting a lyric where he said he could smell indictments and see them coming.
Bro, I was back there that day. I was back there that day, nigga. I was back there that day. I was back there that day. I was back there that day, bro. You don't even got a block. You don't even know you going on T, bro. You a bitch, bro. You don't even got a block, bro. You don't got a block. You don't got a block, bro. You don't got a block. You don't got a block, bro. You don't got a block. You don't got a block, young boy. You don't got a block, bro. You don't got a block, bro. You don't got a block. You don't got a block. You don't got a block, bro. You don't got a block.
After the February 2026 takedown, prosecutors reportedly said he had been 100% a target of the investigation, but they also made it clear the case was never just about him. That matters because it reframes everything people thought they knew. The public saw a single disrespectful rapper. Authorities say they were looking at a wider architecture of violence, and that wider architecture included names many casual viewers had never heard before. In public reporting, figures like Stephen Weddington and Jamir Burbage emerged as some of the most important alleged shooters in the entire case. Weddington and Burbage were publicly tied to the Zia Stafford and Cordia Cheeks killings, and Weddington was also linked in reporting to the Sharif King homicide. These were not the biggest rap celebrities in the story. They were the lower profile names authorities say were central to carrying out the violence. That is one of the reasons the case is so much bigger than a rapper documentary. The most famous face was not necessarily the most operationally important figure in the killings. Other names filled out the structure on both sides.
I'm going to pull up, bro. I'm going to pull up, and any one of my ops could vouch for that. You drop an address and you tell me to pull up right here, I'm going to pull up right here. You not there, anybody out there, I'm going to blow.
Mark Johnson, known as Yak Yola, and Kwame Hall, known as Mayor Pablo, were described in reporting as YBC affiliated rappers with legal exposure tied to specific incidents, including the Sheriff King case. On the rival side, public reporting tied men such as Anthony Woodson, Ronnie Vincent Quan, and Herman Stagel to Tajay Brooks' killing. Other public names, including Marquise Muhammad, Paul Beckwith, Hassan Stafford, Nasir Wells, Hassan Moose, and Tatiana Edwards helped define the broader cast of the indictment. What makes the case unusual is not just the number of names, it is how many of those names sit at the intersection of blocks, alliances, music, and repeated shooting scenes. Then came the moment when all of it was dragged into the light. On February 25th, 2026, Philadelphia authorities announced the sweeping charges. They said 19 people connected to YBC, CCK, and PSK were being charged. They said the spree covered nearly 24 shootings and produced 5 homicides and 35 total shooting victims, with the youngest victim just 5 years old. They said the charges stem from the work of the 33rd Philadelphia County investigating grand jury. They said the case tied together neighborhoods that most people had been thinking about separately, and they said the proof involved a full modern toolkit of gang investigation, including ballistics, surveillance, witness testimony, and digital evidence. That announcement changed everything about how this story had to be understood, because once the city laid the violence out as one timeline, the pattern became harder to deny. This was not one rapper dying. This was not one revenge hit. This was not even one hood war in the traditional sense. This was a multi-neighborhood alliance conflict that kept revisiting the same corridors, using the internet as both scoreboard and stage, and leaving behind a trail that investigators say had been quietly coming together for years. Then just one day later, the case kept moving. The Inquirer reported that Hamza Curry, described as a YFA member, had been located in Missouri and was expected to be extradited in connection with the Carter Cheeks homicide and an older bystander killing from 2021. That development mattered because it showed the file was still growing. The indictment was not the end of the story. It was a public checkpoint in a larger investigation that still had open ends, unnamed people, and older bodies feeding into the same ecosystem. If you want the deeper exclusive version of this story, that is on my site. That is where I break down the Reddit posts, extra details, exact locations, and the hidden layers that go beyond this YouTube version. The link is in the description.